Patrick Donnelly from New England Hockey Journal with Evan Marinofsky here. Bracket Sunday in the NEPSAC. Big day. Playoff fields announced. Elite Eight, small school, large school brackets are all out. Evan, we'll start with the Elite Eight. You got Cushing as the number one. St. Sebastian's hangs in there as the eighth seed. Anything standing out or surprising you there in the Elite Eight?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest thing is that the number one and two seeds shifted coming out of the weekend. We went into the weekend with Kimball Union as one and Cushing as two. Kimball Union lost their first round matchup with Proctor on Friday and fell to number two. So that was really the big thing. So that does change up the first round matchups. I know on Rinkwise, you and I talked Cushing playing St. George's and Kimball Union playing St. Sebastian's. Obviously, that's flipped. Now Cushing plays Seb's. Kimball Union plays St. George's. I don't think it changes a ton. I liked St. Sebastian's chances more against KUA than I did Cushing. So that kind of hinders my ability to pick that as like an upset. Avon and Holderness, Brunswick and Salisbury hold. Brunswick and Salisbury is an interesting matchup just because those two teams met less than a month ago at Brunswick, which is where they'll be for this matchup. And Brunswick won that one on a comeback win. Avon and Holderness have not played yet this year. That's at a to be determined neutral site. So I'm curious where that game goes. So that'll be kind of even. I don't see a heavy favorite in that game either. I think those two teams are fairly even. I don't see a huge advantage either team has, except that Avon won the Elite Eight last year. That's kind of the big advantage there. So nothing wild about this. I didn't think it was going to change much this weekend, and then the only thing that changed were the top two seeds, which I guess are pretty big things to change. But still, that bracket pretty much holds where we thought it would be.
Yeah, and in the large school, some jockeying in the final weekend. You get Nobles at one, Lawrence two, and Dexter three. The rest of the field, of course. What stands out to you here?
What stands out to me is actually that 3 versus 6 matchup with Dexter and Belmont Hill. Those two teams met this past weekend at Dexter. And Dexter won that game 4-1. And that's kind of why Dexter is ranked much higher than Belmont Hill. There's bad blood between these two teams. As I said, they just met. Belmont Hill's going to be out for revenge. Again, it goes back to, I've said this a couple times now. Last year, Milton and Belmont Hill played each other at the end of the season. Milton won by a bunch. They met again in the Elite Eight at Milton, and Belmont Hill won by a bunch. So to me, that could be a potential upset where Belmont Hill is kind of going for revenge. And I think those two teams are so even that it's going to be hard for Dexter to win two games in a row against Belmont Hill. So I think that's one to watch. Um, Kent is an interesting upset. Again, it's hard to justify a 5 beating a 4 as a real upset, but Kent, I had as a team that was kind of Elite Eight worthy at the beginning of the year. They were in and out of my rankings in the first month and a half. That's going to be a tough matchup for Deerfield. But again, as we've seen, Deerfield is a very good team. So I think that's going to be a close game. And then honestly, Berkshire at 8. Berkshire is not your typical 8 seed. Berkshire was kind of in the running for the Elite Eight midway through the year. They weren't like right there, but there was still a path even with a few weeks left. That's a good team. Berkshire's legitimate. So it's not gonna be an easy matchup for Nobles at 1. And I think when you're that number 1 seed, you kind of want the easiest matchup. I don't know if Berkshire's the easiest one here. So that wouldn't shock me if an 8 seed won that one. And then obviously Lawrence and Phillips Andover. I think Lawrence, they're just so styled well for the playoffs. So I don't see that as a potential upset matchup either. But yeah, my big one is 3 versus 6 with Dexter and Belmont Hill.
Yeah. And then we'll wrap up with small school here. Rivers stays at one, St. Mark's two, Canterbury three are your top three seeds. What surprises you, stands out here for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So going into the weekend, Middlesex was that 8 seed, and then Proctor won that game over KUA and probably 2-1 in the Lakes Region playoffs, and takes out Middlesex for themselves. Proctor. I don't think that matters. I think Rivers has a pretty good hold on that 1 versus 8 matchup. Frederick Gunn hopped over Groton, so they flipped this weekend. That was something I wrote about going into the weekend, that they were so close in the RPI. And Frederick Gunn had the favorable matchup this weekend over Groton, that Frederick Gunn was probably going to take over and host that game. They do that. I would Frederick Gunn is the favorable one in that matchup. Although Ethan Remenetti for Groton is so good in net that I think he's going to be what makes that game close. Um, and then you have Canterbury as the 3 seed. You got St. Mark's as the 2 seed. Neither team is playing an opponent that I would project to have an upset. So honestly, I think of all the brackets, the small school has the best chance at having the top 4 seeds advance. And then from there, if Canterbury plays St. Mark's and Rivers plays Frederick Gunn, I think that opens up for a lot of possibilities. Frederick Gunn is a much older veteran team than Rivers. Um, you know, that's going to be an interesting matchup just in terms of, do the young kids from Rivers elevate themselves over Frederick Gunn or vice versa? And then Canterbury and St. Mark's, I think Canterbury is a little bit deeper than St. Mark's is, but St. Mark's might be a little bit better defensively over Canterbury. So, to me, I think the small school is probably the one where you're going to see, as I said, the top 4 seeds advance. But again, once it gets to that, it wouldn't surprise me if it was a 4 versus 3 in the championship, or a 1 versus 2, or a 2 versus 4, or a 1 versus 3. So that's kind of where I think it's a toss up. But yeah, I mean, I think, for Rivers to get in as a 1 seed with a team as young as they are, I think is incredibly impressive. So that's kind of how it stacks up in the small school.
Yeah, and I know you touched on, a couple of matchups already, but any other potential upsets out there that stand out to you? I know we talked about the Ryder Shea factor with St. George's quite a bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I think that still is there. I think it's very interesting with the Elite Eight that you could have Cushing versus Avon, a rematch of the final last year in the semifinals. Again, I think Cushing's hungry to beat Avon. No love is lost between those two teams. I think that's an interesting one. And then again, like if Salisbury upsets Brunswick, which I think could easily happen. I don't think that would shock anybody. If they were to play KUA in that second round, I mean, those are two powerhouse heavy hitters in that second round, in that semifinal round. And again, like, do we get Cushing versus KUA in the finals? Do we get there's a couple interesting matchups there. In terms of 8 seeds, last year St. Mark's went down in the first round. They were a 1 seed. They went down to New Hampton. I think Berkshire is kind of the 8 seed that I would highlight as one that I think is feasible that they could go deep. Saint Seb's, they're so offensive. And again, we said it about if they played KUA. I think it stays true with Cushing. If you're gonna win, if you're Sebs, you've got to score 5 or 6 goals. Like it's got to be a shootout. And against Marco Billick, I don't know if that's super feasible. And then Proctor just beat KUA. Do they have 2 massive wins in them in the span of a week? I don't know. That's a lot to ask of a team that's very, sub 500. So to me, the real 8 seed that I think could do some damage is Berkshire under Kevin Sepiel, who's done a great job this year as his first year as head coach. So that's kind of who I pick. I know I mentioned like Kent in there. I mentioned like Frederick Gunn, but they're 4 seed now. So yeah, I would say that for the 8 seeds, it's really Berkshire.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks, Evan. Quarterfinals begin on Wednesday, so we'll have plenty to cover throughout the week.